The Heiress and the Shadows of Magnolia Hall. It was the summer of 1850, the last age of Southern grace before the storm of history. Beneath the magnolia trees of Natchez, Mississippi, the air shimmered with heat and hypocrisy. And inside the great house of Magnolia Hall, an heiress named Eleanor Whitmore was about to do the one thing no woman of her name, wealth, or color was ever meant to do: fall in love with a man born in chains. According to faded letters locked away in the attic of the old Whitmore estate, Eleanor was 19, educated in Charleston, and promised to a tobacco heir twice her age. Her father, Colonel Nathaniel Whitmore, was one of the region's wealthiest planters, a man who spoke of honor, lineage, and the sanctity of bloodlines. But Eleanor had inherited something far more dangerous than land: curiosity. The house servants whispered that she wandered too often into the stables at dusk, that she lingered by the river path after prayers. Her father ignored the rumors at first. The South was full of gossip, but as the days grew longer, he noticed her absences, her distracted gaze. And then came the name that would haunt the Whitmore family for generations: Isaiah. Isaiah was 24, a field hand born on the Whitmore plantation, known for his strength and quiet intelligence. He was tall, deliberate, and carried himself with a dignity that unsettled those who believed dignity was the privilege of masters. Eleanor first saw him while sketching the fields at sunrise. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither sermon nor whip could undo. Over weeks, their paths crossed in secret, beneath the old willow by the river, in the abandoned smokehouse behind the stables. She read to him from her books, Shelley, Byron, Scripture, and he told her stories his mother had whispered in Gullah tongue. Theirs was not the love of novels, but of defiance, each meeting a quiet rebellion against a world built to keep them apart. But in the antebellum South, love could be a crime greater than murder. When a house servant betrayed their secret, Colonel Whitmore's wrath was biblical. Isaiah was dragged to the whipping post, and Eleanor was locked in her chamber for weeks. The colonel ordered the overseer to have Isaiah sold at the next auction in New Orleans. The girl's cries echoed through the corridors like hymns to a God who no longer answered. That night, Eleanor made her choice. She took the family signet ring, a satchel of coins, and a pistol from her father's desk. Under the moonlight, she slipped to the slave quarters and found Isaiah bleeding, bound, awaiting transport. She cut his ropes with trembling hands and whispered, "We ride tonight." They fled toward the river, two souls against an empire of chains. But freedom, in the South of 1850, was a fragile dream. By dawn, riders followed. The dogs howled. Somewhere between Natchez and Vicksburg, by the muddy banks of the Yazoo River, the lovers were cornered. Witnesses later testified that Eleanor begged them to spare him. "He is not my servant," she cried. "He is my heart." The men laughed. Then, according to the sheriff's record, a gunshot split the morning air. Isaiah fell first. Eleanor, kneeling beside him, turned the pistol upon herself. The newspapers called it madness. The family called it shame. The preacher called it sin. But the locals who found them said the two lay side by side, her hand still resting upon his chest, the magnolia petals falling like snow around them. Years later, as the war came and the old order burned, travelers claimed the riverbank where they died was haunted, that on still nights, one could hear the faint sound of hooves, the whisper of a woman's voice saying, "We ride tonight." According to official ledgers, the Whitmore name faded after the war. But in the oral histories of the South, in the hush between hymn and wind, their story lived on. Not as scandal, but as something rarer. Proof that even in a world built on bondage, love could still defy its masters, the Forbidden Garden. According to surviving fragments of correspondence and the oral recollections of former servants recorded decades later, Eleanor and Isaiah's encounters began not in the shadows, but in the garden, the Forbidden Garden that bordered the western edge of Magnolia Hall. It was a place the Whitmores used for evening teas and charity gatherings, its roses bred from cuttings imported from Savannah. But after dusk, it became a different world, silent, unguarded, and filled with the hum of crickets and cicadas. There, among marble statues and jasmine vines, two people from opposite worlds learned to speak in glances. A letter discovered in the 1880s, written in Eleanor's careful hand, described their first true meeting. "He brought me a sprig of lavender," she wrote, "and told me it grew wild near the riverbank. He spoke little, but his eyes were kind, like a man who had seen more sorrow than I could imagine. I fear I should not have taken it, but I did." That letter, folded and water-stained, was found in a family Bible locked away after her death. Isaiah's presence in the house was never to be acknowledged beyond the stables, yet by autumn, witnesses claimed the heiress began visiting the outbuildings under pretext of tending her horse. Housemaids reported she returned with dirt on her dress and a distant look in her eyes. One overseer testified years later that he saw her once, near twilight, handing the boy a book through the gate. When asked why he had not reported it sooner, he said only, "Because she looked happy." The danger of discovery hung over every whispered word. Under the laws of the time, Isaiah's very existence outside his assigned quarters after dark could have earned him death. For Eleanor, exposure would mean exile or worse. Yet still, the meetings continued. Some historians believe they used a secret signal, a lantern placed in the attic window of Magnolia Hall, visible from the stables, meaning the garden was safe. According to oral testimony collected from the descendants of plantation workers, their love was quiet but visible to those who lived closest to it. "She smiled when he walked by," one elderly woman recalled. "Not the way you smile at a servant, the way you smile at the sun after rain." Such recollections, passed through generations, gave life to what the official records denied, that even under the weight of slavery, humanity found ways to reach out through the bars. By winter, the colonel's suspicion grew. Servants were questioned, movements restricted. The garden gates were locked after dusk. But by then, the forbidden garden had become more than a meeting place. It was a world apart, where the laws of the South no longer ruled. Every secret touch, every stolen word was an act of defiance. One night in December, a cold rain swept through Natchez. Isaiah did not appear at the garden gate. Days passed, and Eleanor's lantern stayed unlit. When he finally returned, his back bore the marks of punishment. He told her nothing of who had done it. He didn't need to. The sight of blood on his shirt said enough. That night, she burned her engagement letters and wept into her pillow until dawn. According to the diary of her maid, Clara, Miss Eleanor prayed with her door open, but she was not praying for forgiveness. She was praying for courage. From that night on, there were no more meetings in the garden. The lovers moved to the only place left unseen, the darkness beyond the stables. History would remember that shift as the beginning of the end. The discovery. According to court depositions taken after the tragedy of 1850, the secret of Eleanor Whitmore and Isaiah was uncovered not by chance, but by betrayal. In the structure of plantation life, every whisper carried weight, and loyalty was often bought with fear. It was a maid named Clara, the same who had once prayed beside her mistress, who revealed the truth under duress. Records from the Adams County Courthouse mention an interrogation conducted by Colonel Nathaniel Whitmore himself, described by one witness as a night of raised voices and breaking glass. It began with suspicion. The colonel had noticed changes: the girl's defiance, her sudden interest in the stables, her refusal to attend church. When he found a missing pistol from his study and a pair of riding gloves stained with mud, the facade of Southern gentility collapsed into fury. He demanded to know who, Clara would later confess. And when I could not speak, he raised his hand. So I told him. That same night, the Kearney summoned Isaiah from the quarters. Witness accounts differ on what happened next, but the outcome was the same. By lantern light, in the courtyard behind Magnolia Hall, the master confronted the servant. The overseer, Thomas Greer, later testified. He asked the boy if he had laid hands on his daughter. The boy did not answer at first. When the colonel struck him, he said, "I never touched her without her will." The blow that followed broke Isaiah's jaw. Greer described the colonel as a man possessed. The servants were ordered indoors, but the screams carried across the fields. At dawn, Isaiah was found bound to the whipping post, his back laid open by 30 lashes. The colonel gave instructions for him to be sold south to Louisiana within the week. In a ledger recovered from the Whitmore estate, the entry appears in precise script. Isaiah Carter, male, 24 years, strong, literate, to be sold, $1,200. Eleanor's reaction was not recorded in official documents, but letters confiscated from her chamber speak in fragments of her despair. One reads, "They have taken him. Father says the Lord is just, but there is no justice here, only chains." Another, unfinished, ends mid-sentence. "If God made him, then God must love him, and if God loves him..." The line fades into inkblots. Rumors spread through Natchez within days. The preacher visited the house to offer counsel, warning that Eleanor's soul was in danger. Neighbors whispered that the colonel intended to send her to Charleston to recover her virtue. But the servants, whose stories would later form the backbone of Southern folklore, said she sat for hours by her window, her face pale as ivory, watching the road that led to the auction house. She refused food, refused prayer, refused to speak. A single surviving witness, an elderly man interviewed in 1891, claimed he had seen her ride out one evening at dusk, bareheaded, without escort. "She rode like a ghost," he said, "and I swear I saw her stop at the quarters. She gave the boy something, maybe a ring, before they dragged him away." When the overseer delivered Isaiah to the trader in Vicksburg, he recorded that the man's hands were still bound, but his eyes were calm. "He looked at me," Greer wrote, "and said, 'You can chain my body, but not my heart.' I thought he meant it as blasphemy. Now I know it was truth." By the time the colonel received word that the sale had been finalized, Eleanor had disappeared from her room. The housemaid found the window open, the bed untouched, and the pistol gone. Down by the river, hoofprints marked the mud, one set light and narrow, the other deep and heavy, as though the earth itself struggled to hold their weight. That night, thunder rolled across the Mississippi plains. In the Whitmore family journal, a single line appears beneath the date: "Eleanor gone." In its place, it left a legend that the South would never forget: the punishment. In which place, it left a legend that the South would never forget: the punishment. The documents that survive from the spring of 1850 read like fragments of a nightmare. Ledgers, sheriff's notes, a half-burned telegram from Vicksburg. Yet together they tell of what followed after Eleanor's disappearance. The colonel's rage, already kindled by shame, that same cardinal's piston gray, erupted into cruelty that even his peers found difficult to defend. According to testimony later given by his overseer, he swore that the name Isaiah would be erased not only from the plantation, but from the very soil that bore it. Isaiah had been sold, as ordered, to a trader named William Harrow. 380. The bill of sale listed him among a shipment of 15 men bound for New Orleans. Somewhere near Port Gibson, the caravan was halted. The reason, according to Harrow's own ledger, was a claim filed by Colonel N. Whitmore, asserting property dispute. The colonel had sent armed men to retrieve the prisoner. To the trader, it was business. To the colonel, it was vengeance. When Isaiah was returned to Magnolia Hall, the plantation fell silent. The servants were confined to quarters. The women of the house were forbidden to leave their rooms. The colonel's wife, sickly and fearful, wrote in her diary, "Nathaniel is not himself. He says the devil took hold of our daughter, and he means to drive it out with blood." The next entry stopped abruptly after that. Eyewitness accounts from enslaved workers, recorded in the Federal Writers Project almost a century later, describe what happened behind the smokehouse. One man, then a boy of 12, said, "They chained him to the post. The master prayed out loud, asking the Lord to cleanse his house. Then the whip came down, not once or twice, but till the skin came off like bark. Another recalled, Miss Eleanor came running, screaming his name. She fell on her knees. The master told the overseer to take her away, but she wouldn't move. In one retelling preserved through oral tradition, Eleanor threw herself over Isaiah's body, shielding him from further blows. If you strike him again, she is said to have cried, you strike me too. The overseer hesitated. The colonel did not. He ordered both of them locked in the carriage house until dawn. The next morning, Isaiah was gone. Some say the colonel had him taken by riverboat that night, sold once more, this time under a false name. Others claim he was killed and buried in the swamp beyond the cotton fields. No record confirms either fate. The plantation's slave registry for 1850 lists his name crossed out in thick ink, beside a single word, removed. Eleanor survived in body, but not in spirit. Letters from her aunt in Charleston mention her confinement. She is kept in the East Wing under supervision. She neither eats nor speaks. Her eyes are wild. Nathaniel says it is God's punishment. One entry from May 1850 records a visit by Reverend Samuel Briggs, who wrote afterward, "The young mistress is beyond prayer. She repeats the name Isaiah like a hymn, over and over, until her voice breaks." By midsummer, Magnolia Hall had become a house of whispers. The colonel rarely appeared in town. The fields went untended. Visitors spoke of a strange stillness, of windows kept shuttered in daylight, of a voice singing at night from the upper floors a song in a language none recognized. The servants believed it was Isaiah's mother, mourning her son in the old African way. But others said it was Eleanor, calling to someone who would never answer. In August, the colonel's wife was found dead in her bed, the Bible open beside her. 2 weeks later, Eleanor escaped her confinement. A letter from a neighboring planter reported seeing a pale figure riding along the river road, barefoot, hair unbound, in a white dress. No one followed. By morning, she was gone. Years later, when Union soldiers marched through the ruins of Magnolia Hall, they found a small grave near the cypress grove. The cross bore no name, only the word beloved. Some said it was Isaiah's resting place. Others claimed Eleanor herself lay there. The truth, like the South's conscience, was buried with them. According to one surviving witness who lived long enough to tell the story, the master thought he could chain love like he chained men. But love ain't a thing you can own. It'll burn the hand that holds it. A disappearance. The official record of Eleanor Whitmore's disappearance was brief, a single paragraph in the Natchez County Gazette, dated September 2nd, 1850. Miss E. Whitmore, daughter of Colonel Nathaniel Whitmore of Magnolia Hall, presumed missing. Last seen near the Yazoo River. The family requests prayers for her safe return. No search party was ever organized. No inquiry followed. The South, preoccupied with its own order, buried her vanishing as quietly as it had buried its sins. But the story did not end there. Diaries, sermons, and oral accounts from the years that followed reveal a catchwork of sightings, each tinged with the aura of myth. One account, recorded by a riverboat captain in 1852, described a young woman traveling north under the name Anna Carter. She was pale, thin, and carried no luggage save a small satchel and a worn Bible. When asked her destination, she answered, "Where the river ends." The captain wrote that she disembarked near Memphis and vanished into the forests beyond. Another witness, a Union chaplain decades later, claimed to have met an elderly black woman in Louisiana who spoke of the white lady who lived among us, who dressed like us, who prayed with us. Her story told of a fugitive who arrived one stormy night, sick and near death, taken in by a small community of freed people living deep in the bayou. The woman said the stranger healed slowly and began teaching the children to read by candlelight. She said she was paying her penance, the old woman recalled. Said she once had heaven in her hands and let it die. Whether Eleanor truly escaped or died by the river, the documents leave room for both truths. In 1867, during Reconstruction, A surveyor marking the old Whitmore property reported finding a ring engraved with the initials E.W. beside a fragment of bone. It was near the swamp's edge, half buried in mud. When he brought it to town, the relic was quietly taken by a Whitmore cousin and never seen again. The colonel himself lived another 3 years. Letters between the family lawyer and the First Bank of Natchez show that by the time of his death, the Whitmore fortune had collapsed. The plantation fell into disrepair, and the fields grew wild. In his will, a single line stood out: "I ask the Lord to forgive me the pride that cost me my child." The rest of the page was blank. After his burial, locals began reporting strange occurrences around the abandoned house. Travelers along the river claimed they heard a woman's voice singing softly in the night, a melody without words. Field hands refused to enter the stables after dark. One carpenter hired to board the windows swore he saw footprints in the dust, small, bare, and wet, as if from someone freshly risen from the river. By the late 19th century, the story of Eleanor and Isaiah had become legend. Preachers in the Delta towns used it as a parable of sin, pride, and divine retribution. But among the freedmen and their descendants, the story took another form. They told their children of two souls who had defied the law and found each other beyond its reach. They said the magnolia trees that grew along the river bent lower each spring, as though mourning for the lovers who never came home. In the 1930s, a Federal Writers Project researcher recorded an interview with a woman named Ruth Carter, who claimed to be Isaiah's granddaughter. She told the interviewer that her grandmother, a woman named Lila, had once carried a gold ring on a chain around her neck. On its inner band were the initials EW. Ruth said her grandmother never spoke of where it came from, only that it was the last promise of a woman who loved a man she could not save. Today, nothing remains of Magnolia Hall except the crumbled foundations hidden beneath wild jasmine and oak. The river has shifted its course. The land has reclaimed its secrets. But sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees, the locals say it sounds like the rustle of a dress, the faint whisper of two horses in flight. According to the last surviving document in the Whitmore archive, a page unsigned, undated. Written in a delicate hand, the story ends as it began, with defiance. "If love be my sin, then let the world remember my sin as proof that the heart was never meant to be a slave." The legacy of Magnolia Hall. According to historical registries and the few surviving descendants of Adams County, the name Whitmore all but vanished from the records after the Civil War. The estate was seized for back taxes and its lands divided among creditors. By 1871, the once grand Magnolia Hall was listed as abandoned property of uncertain ownership. Yet the legend of its mistress, Eleanor Whitmore, refused to fade. Her story lingered not in legal documents, but in the margins, in sermons, in songs, and in the trembling recollections of those who had lived beneath her family shadow. The earliest written account appears in a Reconstruction-era newspaper from New Orleans. A correspondent, visiting the ruins of Natchez, described hearing an old man singing by the river. He sang of the girl who gave her life for love, and the man who taught her freedom. That folk song, sometimes called Eleanor's Ride, spread along the Mississippi in the years that followed. Versions were recorded among freedmen's congregations, blending biblical imagery with the language of emancipation. The refrain, preserved in an 1884 hymnal, read, we ride, through the shadow and the chain. The Lord knows our sorrow. The Lord knows our pain." By the turn of the century, historians began to rediscover the Whitmore papers. Some treated them as romantic tragedy, others as evidence of a moral reckoning in the Old South. In a lecture at Tulane University in 1909, Professor Henry Alden remarked, "What shocks us most is not the act of defiance, but that it occurred in silence, that within the sanctity of a household devoted to God and order, love could be both sacred and forbidden." His words would later be quoted in abolitionist retrospectives as proof that even the heart of privilege was not immune to guilt. But among the descendants of those who once worked the Whitmore fields, the story took a different tone. To them, Eleanor was not a martyr, nor a cautionary tale. She was a witness, a symbol of what happens when the oppressor sees the humanity of the oppressed and is destroyed by the revelation. In oral traditions recorded throughout Mississippi in the early 20th century, she appears not as a tragic heroine, but as a spirit guide, a restless soul who haunts the riverbanks, leading the lost toward freedom. A WPA ethnographer in 1938 interviewed a farmer near Vicksburg who claimed that his grandmother had met the ghost herself. Said she was white, but not like folks here, he recalled. She glowed like moonlight. Asked her where she was going. She said, looking for him. Then she was gone. Later researchers found evidence suggesting that the story of Eleanor and Isaiah influenced early spirituals sung by river workers during Reconstruction. Lines about the white lady on the shore and the man who crossed the river free appear in several recorded work songs. Scholars have since argued that, through the merging of memory and myth, their love became a metaphor for deliverance, a quiet rebellion retold in rhythm and verse. According to local church records, the site of Magnolia Hall was consecrated in 1912 when a small wooden chapel was built atop the old foundation. The church still stands today, surrounded by magnolia trees. Parishioners claim that every spring, just before dawn, the scent of lavender fills the air, though none grows nearby. They say it's Eleanor's doing, a sign that her soul, once confined by the laws of men, still walks free among the living. In the end, the legacy of Magnolia Hall is not written in stone or scripture, but in whiskers carried by the wind. It is a story of what the South tried to forget, that love once dared to cross the color line, that a woman of privilege defied her blood, and that a man born enslaved became, in death, something unbroken. Together, their memory stands as quiet testimony to the truth that survives even the ruin of empires. As one anonymous inscription carved into the church's altar rail reads, "The chains are gone, but the song remains, echoes of the river." According to the Natchez Historical Society's oral archives, the Yazoo River, where Eleanor and Isaiah were last seen, became a place of uneasy reverence. Fishermen refused to cast their nets there after nightfall. They spoke of ripples that moved against the current, of soft voices rising with the fog. Some swore they saw two figures on horseback, half-formed in the mist, one pale as the moon, the other dark as the water. Whether born of memory or conscience, these stories refused to die. By the late 19th century, the tale of the Magnolia lovers had spread far beyond Mississippi. Newspapers in New Orleans, Savannah, and even Boston carried serialized retellings, each version reshaping the story to fit the teller's purpose. To Southern gentry, it was a moral fable about disobedience and ruin. To abolitionists, it was a parable of conscience, proof that even the privileged could awaken to injustice. And to those who traced their lineage through the scars of bondage, it was something else entirely, a testament to a love that survived the unspeakable. A letter preserved in the archives of the Freedmen's Bureau, written in 1870 by a teacher stationed near Vicksburg, captures this transformation. The colored folk here tell of a woman who once defied her kin for a man in chains. They say her ghost walks the riverbank, watching over runaways who seek the North Star. Whether she was real or not, I see in their eyes that they believe her heart still beats in every soul that refuses to bow. By the turn of the century, the myth had taken on a life of its own. Ballads sung by steamboat workers turned the lovers into symbols, not of tragedy, but of redemption. In some verses, Eleanor and Isaiah escape together, crossing into freedom beneath a sky of lightning. In others, they are slain but rise again, their spirits bound to the river, guiding those who came after. Every retelling blurred the line between history and hope. In 1925, folklorist Clara Middleton recorded an elderly man named Amos Devereaux, who claimed to be Isaiah's great-nephew. His recollection, captured on a wax cylinder, still exists in the Library of Congress. In a voice cracked by age, he said, My people remember her, that lady. Said she loved him true, when I was a boy. My grandma used to tell me that love's like water. You can chain it, you can dam it, but it'll always find a way through the cracks. The recording ends with a faint hum, a tune scholars believe to be a version of Eleanor's Ride. Modern historians have debated the factual basis of the legend. Some argue that Eleanor and Isaiah were inventions of Reconstruction folklore, a Southern attempt to atone through story. Others point to the consistency of details across multiple testimonies. The letters, the ring, the unnamed grave near the cypress grove. Even skeptics admit that too many fragments align for coincidence. As one historian wrote in a 1982 journal article, perhaps truth and legend are not enemies here, but partners, one supplying what the other cannot bear to say aloud. Today, the Yazoo runs quieter. The plantations are gone, their fields reclaimed by the forest, but locals still speak of the nights when the air turns heavy and the scent of magnolia drifts across the water. They say it means she's near, that the heiress walks the banks, waiting for the man who promised he would return when the river runs clear. And though scholars continue to sift through ledgers and letters, hoping to separate fact from myth, one truth endures beyond doubt. In a time when love was forbidden by law, two hearts defied an empire, and in their defiance, they became immortal. As the old river song goes, we ride through the thunder, we ride through the flame. No master can bind us, no grave knows our name. The last testament of the South. According to the Mississippi State Archives, the final mention of Eleanor Whitmore appears in an unsigned affidavit from 1851, a statement never filed with the court, found decades later among mold-stained church records. It reads simply, "She did not die, as they said. She lived among the ones her family called lost, and in her final hour she called upon no Lord but love itself." Whether truth or myth, those words became a kind of epitaph for both her and Isaiah, the forgotten saints of a broken world. By the 20th century, the story of the Magnolia lovers had transcended its origins. Writers, artists, and filmmakers returned to it as if drawn by gravity, each generation seeking meaning in its sorrow. Some painted Eleanor as a symbol of Southern guilt, a woman crushed by the weight of the world her father built. Others saw Isaiah as prophecy incarnate, the spirit of freedom born from suffering. Together, they became a mirror in which America could not help but see itself. In 1964, during the height of the Civil Rights Movement, a mural appeared on the wall of a burned church outside Jackson. It showed a white woman and a black man standing hand in hand before the Mississippi River, their faces turned toward a rising sun. Beneath them, in faded paint, the words, "Love shall outlive the lash." No artist ever claimed it. Locals said it was the work of a preacher's daughter, who vanished soon after. Federal agents dismissed it as vandalism, but the mural remained, weathered, defiant, a silent sermon to the generations that followed. Academics would later call this transformation the second life of the Whitmore story, the point at which it ceased to belong to the past and became part of the moral geography of the South. Professors lectured on it as allegory. Poets recited it as lament. Yet among the descendants of those who once labored in the Whitmore fields, it was never allegory at all. It was memory, a living truth carried in hymns and heartbeats. In one of the last recorded interviews for the Mississippi Folklife Project, an elderly woman named Sarah Devereaux, said to be a descendant of Isaiah's brother, was asked what she believed became of Eleanor. Her answer was soft, almost a whisper. She found him. Maybe not here, but somewhere better. You see, heaven don't care what color your hands were, only that they were kind. Today, the site of Magnolia Hall is marked by a single plaque, placed there by the local historical society in 1999. It reads, Magnolia Hall Plantation, c. 1823 to 1863, once home to the Whitmore family. Legend tells of Eleanor Whitmore, an heiress who defied her kin to love Isaiah Carter, a man enslaved on this land. Their story of love, loss, and redemption endures as testimony to the human heart's resistance against tyranny. Visitors still leave flowers there, magnolia blossoms, lavender sprigs, sometimes a single ring wrapped in cloth. And when the wind moves through the tall grass, one might imagine hearing hooves in the distance, or the faint murmur of two voices promising eternity. As dusk falls over the river, the story ends where it began, with a whisper beneath the magnolias, too fragile for the world that tried to silence it. For in the long, cruel history of the South, where power sought to divide and possession masqueraded as love, there was once a woman and a man who dared to prove otherwise. And though their names fade with time, the lesson they left behind does not. No law can bind the soul. No empire can outlast the heart.